His forces flew high, led by the grey-scaled one that was now his own, heading straight to the floating city of the dragons. The legion that followed was made up of an amalgamation of his own horrors, who now sported twisted draconic wings, enabling them semi-controlled flight. They were neither graceful in appearance nor adept in their motion and guidance of their owners. But they did what was needed. They got them to the target. He himself had assumed the form of one of the many daemons he had taken in the past, but fashioned wings of pure magic, and glided effortlessly along as he absorbed the raw magic he passed through. Yes, this would be a simple affair, he reasoned, as they touched down within the citadel's outer area, in one of the places set aside for those who flew. They all began to draw more power to them as they moved purposely through the archways and into the inner buildings. But wait, there were new symbols not here prior. What were they for? It was too late now, for the attack was underway, but they were unfamiliar, and although radiating magic, were not something he could identify. Still, there would be time for that once he had taken them. The grey one led them toward the central chambers, where the true prime chamber lay. This was the first goal, to knock this place from the skies so that his legions below could ravage them. But the magic here was high. Too high. As the grey one rounded a corner, a humongous hand shot forth from out of sight, grasping their neck tightly, and as they were pushed backwards the bulk of the defender was seen. It was one of the monolithic draconic guardians. It stood glistening in the chamber's glow, rippling with power as the air around it seemed distorted from this flow, and the grey fought not to be overcome by this magical assault as it held him fast. He watched on as the grey fought back. Physically, it seemed insurmountable to those who could be considered mortal, and even to the likes of the dragons themselves it was impossible to withstand their sheer power. At least there is just the one, he thought, as he began moving to aid the grey, but stopped, glanced around, and then jumped backwards as another guardian emerged from the wall, grasping at the now empty air. Well, this was not expected, and he readied himself for the fight. Several of the amalgamations leapt forward to engage it, ripping at its body and trying to pull threads from it. It was useless, however, as the threads were as thick and as strong as tempered steel, and they would not yield to an assault by such a small power. It was not, however, prepared for one such as him. Of that he was sure. Their forms melted in their grasp in seconds, the resulting destruction of their forms releasing magic, now adrift in the air. Unraveling threads to make them ineffective. He nodded, moving to striking distance. But how will you fare against that of the divine, I wonder? The grey was still struggling in the grasp of the other guardian, and although not showing any signs of being able to escape their grasp, they were at least holding on, and looked able to do so for quite some time. The second guardian stood before him, a towering form looming, and he stepped forward and waited for them to grasp him. It moved deliberately, and as their hands reached out to hold him, he met theirs with his own hands, and they stood locked as two wrestlers might when testing their opponent's strength. He watched, his senses ready to glean all they could from this construct, but it was not what he had thought. He could sense the will of many within it, driving it to defend. And among this cacophony a voice rang out as their leader. It was an amalgamation of the fallen. This was where their dead were. In life we protected, and in death we do so still. He heard their words ring around his mind as they channeled power at him, and began pulling at his threads. But they stopped pushing power within seconds. They knew what he was. Their power was withdrawn, and they attempted to release their grasp, but he was not going to allow them to escape that easily. The guardian lifted him up high and began slamming him against the walls and ground, bouncing him off the ceiling, trying to force him to release them. But he simply began to smile and then laugh as they continued. They could do nothing to him with their magic, and they knew it. The only thing they could do was try and escape him. But he held them in his immensely powerful claws. They were going nowhere. So, departed ones, you live on here? His face twisted into a nightmarish draconic visage. Perhaps you should join me in my eternity instead. With that, he anchored his form to the ground as he landed upon it, and lifted them effortlessly. He could hear that cacophony within him panic, seeking a way out, but they knew there was none. They were his now. He began to draw their power into his form, breaking their wards and drawing the raw energies from them. And as he did so, he was hit by a blast of raw magic from the other guardian, who had left the grey in a heap on the floor, in order to assist their brethren. The magic shook him for a moment, not hurting, but merely distracting him, and he turned to their advancing form, releasing one of the guardian's hands and instead replacing it around their throat before removing the other. As the other guardian came closer, he raised the free hand and threw a bolt of his own divine energies at them. They reeled from the impact, slamming into a wall, and as they rose to their feet, a channeled beam of energy pushed them back to the wall, pinning them fast. Now they were no longer a threat to him, if they could have ever been considered such. His attention returned to the guardian he held. The stripping of power began anew, but the voices were somewhat quieter than before, and as he pulled power from them, within a short time the leading voice was all he heard. You may strip this vessel of its power, lost one, but you will never gain our truths, the leader said to him. Wait, where had they... Again! He cursed audibly as the laughing voice of their last faded, and all he could sense was magic, no actual threats. They are not going to give their secrets easily, it seems, he thought, his mood changing from victory to one of bitterness. He turned his attention to the other guardian. It was still held in his beam, but they had stopped struggling against him, and as he approached he could only sense raw energies slowly leaking from their form. Why were they so willing to irrevocably remove themselves from this existence? Why? No, wait. It made sense if they knew of things that he was to be kept from knowing. Perhaps they knew more of his origins than he. Or maybe their minds held secrets that would make him even more powerful. This was infuriating, of that he was sure, and he ripped the guardian in two, saturating the area in the resulting magical release. His lesser creations became one with the flow as the magical release overpowered their forms. The grey absorbed some of the explosion, but still lay there recovering from their injuries. He surveyed the flow around him and found no threads within, his minions truly being gone, and recreating would only assure their immediate destruction due to the power now pervading here. And so he did the only thing he could. He fed, drawing the energies into him and bolstering himself still further. As he did, he noticed some of his magic seemed as though it was not only from this prime, but from another planar source, and from one he did not know of. Are they drawing power from a plane as well as this prime? He wondered. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden wash of magic that, for a moment, stunned him. What was that? He said out loud, staggering from the blow. Where had it come from? A few seconds later another wave hit him hard, briefly stunning him again. This is divine magic, he said, getting his senses ready for the next pulse, and sure enough it came. And sure enough he was stunned again. But now he had a direction, and began moving as fast as he could towards it, toward the chamber that held the true prime.